Here we always may have to have a distinction. I will never use the word left in isolation. The political left, okay, again, in which I grew up and with which, in many ways, with which I identify and agree. There's an emphasis on the values of the marginalized and disenfranchised. There's an emphasis on protecting those who might be subject to the forces of those who don't care about their quality of life. So I will say workers, for example, as the original concern of the political left, women, minorities, all kinds of minorities, immigrants, the justice system. There's all kinds of things that are the chosen passions and social action of the political left. Now, I'm not saying that people who are conservative don't have those values. They have a different way of acting on those values. So I think in my mind, the cultural struggle in our country, presented in the best way possible, is what I'm going to call, now I'll say liberals, center liberal, center conservative, all the way to conservative. They're all after the same thing, which is Enlightenment values, but done in different ways. So I don't like a conservative who hates the liberals. I don't like liberals who hate conservatives, because I think it's different ways to answer the same question, and there's wisdom across the spectrum. This is why I call myself a centrist, although I'm actually not on the center of most things. On most things, I'm actually more liberal or more conservative, depending on the topic. Okay, so I'm going to say what I mean by the left is the political left, which I admire, and I certainly admire their values and I admire their goals, okay? Now, other parts of me say you're doing the right thing in the wrong way. I'm going to put that aside. The ideological left pretends to be the political left. Always remember this. The ideological left is not really the political left. Because the ideological left, you'll notice, typically does not care about the quality of life of marginalized people. Okay? So there's more focus on destroying Israel than, for example, building industry on the West Bank. In fact, there have been people who have tried to go into the West Bank and improve the quality of life, and they've been hounded out of the West Bank because some people need the West Bank to be impoverished so that the narrative of oppression can be delivered over. There's a Palestinian American billionaire who actually built a whole Middle Eastern modern a town that was left uninhabited because people were discouraged from moving in. Refugees are more important to the Palestinian cause than actually improving the quality of life. Now, you can go look this up. Palestinian American billionaire builds model town in Palestine. Last I heard, it was uninhabited. Don't believe me, you can go look it up. So notice, there is not a focus, let's say, on the West Bank in the rule of law, an efficient legal system, protection of rights of all. In fact, one big problem in Israel is honor killings in Arab villages. It's critical. And there was recently a butchery of a young woman, and I'll say the Israeli center-right looked at the left and said, here's an example of your values completely violated. Why don't you say anything? And then the other side is, we're busy overthrowing the fascist state, which is another very bizarre statement that Israel became a fascist state. But you'll notice in the ideological left, there's more focus on the ideological fight that I would say than the traditional concerns of the political left. Okay, clear? So that's how. You would say from the political left, there should be a fight for Enlightenment values in Gaza and the West Bank. There's not. The focus is on destroying Israel as an oppressor. Yeah, thank you. The question is how to engage in discussion. Social media is really not efficient. It's actually pretty horrible. I tried back in the day, when I had a point of view that I could back up with an entire array of facts. It made no difference. Okay, so you can't argue on social media. I make my case, and if I see any comment that I don't like, I erase it and make sure the person can never post on my timeline again. Okay, so social media is not the place to work things out. I'm not saying don't post. I'm saying don't argue. So I follow many people. I just want to hit the likes and make sure they get a lot of action. I don't argue with anybody, okay? The only thing I really argue about, this is I'll now make a secret known, is I belong to many humor lists on Facebook, especially Far Side and Puns, and somebody will complain that something's not funny. And I will argue about funny. I mean, that is something I can take a stand on in my spare time. So yeah, I said, yeah, it actually is funny. And let me explain to you what it is. You killed the joke because you explained it. I said, well, you didn't understand to begin with, so I had to do my job here. I'm exaggerating only a little bit. Okay. In general, don't argue on social media. You can only discuss with a person who will discuss with you. And remember, whatever they say, because I rely on the truth, so I don't have any doubt in my method. When a person says Palestine, you say, define Palestine. Now, I gave a talk on this a couple of years ago, replete with maps and diagrams and everything. We're trying to track it down. So I get all those sources together, put them online. So when someone says Palestine, you're going to bring out 10 pages of maps and show that Palestine is not a people, it's not a state, it's a region like the Rocky Mountains. Nobody owns it. People live there. People live, move away. Governments control it, but it's not owned by the Rocky Mountaineers. Okay, once you understand, they say Palestine, you say, pause, let's discuss Palestine. Now, they will be bewildered because they have learned that it's the land of the Palestinians when it was the land of the Romans, of Byzantium, of the Arabs, of the Turks. They ruled the land. So when someone says Zionists illegally occupied the land, say, no, they actually bought land with permission of the Turks and the British. So under what definition can it be illegal if everything was done legally? Now, after the 1948 war, you do have a problem, but what was the 1948 war over? It was over land. The other side wanted all the land out of conquest. You might say the Israeli side also wanted all the land, but were satisfied with part of the land. Well, the other side lost the war and never gave up the claim to all the land. So when someone says it belongs to the Palestinians, we say, why doesn't it belong to the Jews? Well, they were there first. Not really. How far back in history do you want to go? It was called Judea. Then go where the word Palestine came from. Well, they have an ongoing ethnic identity. Actually, they don't. You can look up demographics of Palestine and find there are times when Palestine was almost depopulated. You can read about that. You can read travel logs. You can look at there's a book of maps of Palestine. It's written in Latin from the 1450s that shows it was an uninhabited region. It became re-inhabited from immigration from Egypt, Algeria, Syria, and so forth. Now, I don't expect this will ever happen, but if you did a DNA analysis of Palestinians, I think, personally, I could be wrong, you won't find many people with ethnic Arab heritage, meaning from the Arabian Peninsula. I'm not saying this is bad, but it is a region into which people emigrated and then became long-term residents. Now, a person could say, I from a village that goes back 1,000 years, maybe, but maybe not, because I don't think they've done a DNA analysis, and maybe they have. But in general, when a person says Palestine, Palestinians, I want you to know, the more you study the history of the region of Palestine, the maps of Palestine, immigration of Palestine, demographics of Palestine, and also the first time the term Palestinian people was ever used was around the year 1900. Now, this is assuming, Lily, that a person says something. You can say, would you like to talk? Or you just want to, spout slogans at me? No, I'd like to talk. Your first question is, do you believe that Israel has the right to exist behind safe and secure borders? The person says, no, you're probably not going to get anywhere. You might, but you might not. If they said maybe, say, okay, we have a discussion. I'm going to end this here. Let's say a person says, it wasn't right for the Zionists to settle on the land. Now, this will require some preparation. You can say, can you define right for me? Because you're using the word right and wrong. I don't know what you mean by it. If you ask anybody who says it wasn't right, and you ask them to define the word right, I almost guarantee you they will not have an answer. They don't know what they're talking about because they've only been taught that Zionism is wrong. They have not been taught about the theory of right and wrong. in which, I have a doctorate. So I've said, what do you mean by right? What do you mean by having a right? They haven't studied it because they only use it in one context, to delegitimize Israel. Now, again, I hope to do teachings on this, put them on YouTube. You can find them anytime. What does it mean to have a right? What does it mean to do something morally right or wrong? Because they use this language that can't be backed up in any rational way. So your first question is, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? Right, and we're just going to use the word loosely here, which means they have a moral right to repel aggressors behind safe and secure borders. If they say no, you might ask why, and hear their argument, write it down, say, I'm not going to argue, so I want to understand you, and then send it to me, and I'll do a YouTube dedicated to Lily Rockwell. What can one do on social media? Just present facts. And I've done that a few times where a person will mention something historical, and I will say, for the sake of listeners, that's actually not true. Here's my link. That's not factual, but never argue. I should have put that in the beginning. Thank you very much. Don't argue. Just put links to facts. That you can do and say, do with this fact whatever you want. I have done that many times in the past. Not recently because I'm interested in other things, but I certainly have done that. Thank you for that. A large amount of documentary evidence, which is one reason why I know what I know. And by the way, I've also read books by anti-Israel authors. I read books by people who want to delegitimize Israel because I need to know their documents and their point of view. And I think many of you know that when I did give a history of Zionism and Israel-Palestine many years ago, which I will redo, I did have Arabs, Palestinians attend, and they congratulated me that I presented the facts fairly. And I made a distinction between my facts, the facts that are documentary, theories that I derive from facts, with which they might not agree, but they are theories rooted in facts. And remember, different theories can come out of the same facts. That's rationally true. And then I would give my opinions, and I clearly state what my opinion was. But what they liked about it was how profoundly respectful I was of those who have different theories rooted on the same facts and opinions that are inspired by mastery of facts and theories. Now, if there was a hostile person there, and there wasn't, I would have not gained any ground. So I want to say to you, if a person is hostile, ideologically driven, I don't think we have any hope in changing them in one conversation. Now, if enough people say, what is Palestine? What do you mean by a right? Can you tell me more about anti-imperialism? If you just ask questions and don't argue, lights might go on. But you just got to be super patient, understand facts, understand ideas, present documentary evidence, and ask questions. Don't argue. I just ask questions. And oftentimes when a person is not opposed, they don't have to back it up with an ideological argument because you're asking, what do you mean by this term? And they get to talk it out, and then I say, thank you, I have a lot to think about. Now, why can this be effective? Because when people are questioned about their term, not argued with, questioned by an able questioner, they realize they have to come up with coherent answers that are not self-contradictory. So one way that I have had success in these kind of conversations is not argue. Simply ask questions until they approach the border of incoherence, and let them feel the border of incoherence, and I'm just asking questions. Now, I know a lot, which is one reason I can do this. So I want to empower all of you to ask a set of good questions based on, I'll say, documentary evidence and solid theories, and let them try to answer your questions. Don't argue. Root yourself in facts, root yourself in good theories, have opinions that can be strongly supported by evidence, by the way, not just an opinion, but a supported theory, a supported opinion, engage another person, and they themselves will begin to recognize the distinction between a solid theory based on facts, a supportable opinion, because you will have them, and what they're operating under, which is oftentimes because they're not trained. They just have passion, they have ideas. I mean, they have sympathies and they have hatred, but typically don't have well-formed opinions and theories. So I hope you understand my approach. My approach is not argue with ideologues, but ask questions of ideologues, when you have someone who's open-minded, you have a better chance to make a case, which we should all do. In the Bible, Zionism is the beautiful place where the Israelites would create a just society rooted in the worship of one God. Now, I can add a lot of nuance to that, but that's an idea that you will find supported by the documentary evidence in the Bible. There's also clearly a lot of complexity. When you get to the exile, there's, you might say, almost a mythological Zion among the Babylonian Jews, where Zion was understood to be the place where God, it was called the Axis Mundi, where God and earth were connected in Jerusalem. You'll see this, for example, in the prophecy of Ezekiel and other places where, in the absence of living in the land of Israel and living in Jerusalem, it achieved an almost mythological status as the Axis Mundi, where the axis on which heaven and earth spun together. Now, throughout the development, let's say, rabbinic literature, this idea of the homeland of the Jewish people, Zion, Jerusalem, the land of Israel, as this idea to create a sovereign state rooted in justice, in the worship of one God, continues. There were always Jews who immigrated to Israel, either under the rule of the Arabs and the Turks. It oftentimes didn't go well because they couldn't really do what they wanted, but they felt the sanctity of living in Zion. So what I'm going to call the religious perspective is Zion, as the land of Israel and Jerusalem, have a special status in the Jewish religion. A kind of a mythical status is where that only there can one be fully an Israelite. And there are many religious Zionists that have that idea. The land of Israel is where one's Jewishness is fulfilled, and that's where we work out creating a just society worshiping one God. It's a strong tenet of religious Zionism. Now, some people hate them because they make a claim to the land, which is a mirror of the Palestinian claim to the land. It's all ours. Now, if people really hate that idea, well, I would say, A, it is Jewish. I wouldn't operate under that idea. If I were in charge, I'd like to come to a deal. But it's not an invalid idea. In fact, it's a mirror of the idea of the other side. We own all the land, and the religious Zionist says, no, Jews own all the land. Now, let's talk. I don't know what would happen if there was actually a reasoning conversation to take place. Okay? So I'll leave that intact. Now, another development of Zionism that produced what I'm going to call, from the second Aliyah on, was a Zionism very much informed by Marxism and socialism, that the just state that the Jews would create in Zion would be informed by socialist ideas, why the kibbutz movement was so strong in the development of the state of Israel. Socialism was understood to be the most righteous configuration of a just society. When I was growing up in the States, I thought every Israeli lived on a kibbutz. I never knew it was 5% of the population. I wondered, what does everybody else do? Well, everybody else did what normal people do. They go to work in the morning and they work in a shop, or they have a shop. And, Israel was a functioning, variegated economy. But what I'll call the socialist myth was identified with Israel. Myth meaning not in a negative sense, but that every Israeli was part of the social experiment. And of course, all Israeli governments until Menachem Begin were socialist for good and bad. And there's clearly some problems with socialism that did not serve Israeli society well, that inhibited economic growth. That was Zionism. Zionism was Jewish socialism. Okay? Now, after Menachem Begin, you might say the idea of Zionism was decentralized. There were social Zionists, socialist Zionists, cultural Zionists, like Ahad Ha'am is the place where Jewish culture gets to develop in a way that's not going to be destroyed by non-Jewish circles. So there's an array of Zionism. If you want to read about this, read Arthur Hertzberg's book from 1972, therefore it's dated, called The Zionist Idea, because Menachem Begin Zionism was rooted in Zionist theoreticians that preceded 1977, but he was a follower of those ideas. So if you want to read one volume with the documentary evidence on the Zionist idea, Arthur Hertzberg, The Zionist Idea. I know there are books subsequent to that, but that should be the foundational place in your library. So what is Zionism? From my perspective, Zionism is a word that at its basis is the idea of the land of Zion for Israelites, which now would mean the state of Israel for the Jewish people, with a whole range of ideas. I don't like it that religious Zionists are somehow considered to be anathema and out of the conversation because they have enough votes in Israel to elect, a substantial number of people to parliament. They can argue that their ideas are rooted in Jewish sources and that no group should be demonized by a few people in that group. So when people say religious Zionists, I said, look, Zionism began as in Jewish religion. And Mirav and I know a lot of these people. We've been to their homes, and they are incredibly beautiful, refined people of the best values that they can imagine, except that they believe that the land of Israel belongs to Jews. Now, we can agree or disagree. That's going to get worked out in the ballot box in my mind. So if I'm understanding our conversation correctly, for me, teaching Zionism would not teach that one group of Zionists are evil unless they do evil things. Now, I mean as a group, not a bad actor here and there, but as a group. To teach that the land of Israel belongs to the Jews is not an evil thing. It's actually all over the Bible. I don't think the Bible is evil. So in response to how do we teach Zionism? Teach it as a core idea that has a spectrum of ideas. We ought not hate one group. I'll just say another word. There are people on the right who hate the kibbutz movement. They really hate it. They hate the idea that Judaism teaches socialism because they think socialism is such a bad idea. So I say to them, we do believe in justice. It's a theory of justice, and it's a voluntary society. You're not trying to impose on anybody else. I mean, the imposition of socialism on Israel ended in 1977. So as you can imagine, our goal is stop hating, start listening, have reasonable conversations, and feel that we understand each other, and then form my opinion, but don't try to foist it on anybody else, but live in a constant state of dialogue with everybody, as long as they're not teaching a palpable evil such as murder and atrocities against other people. What Mirav and I witnessed, we were there during the protest, as you know, that the protesters were, when they talk about a Jewish democratic state, they wanted to eject the idea of Jewish, just democratic. A very strong attachment. And you can see this in the rhetoric. You can see this in the posters. It would say Jewish democracy with the word Jewish crossed out and end the occupation. Now, we saw so many of those signs, but we realized it's really not about the legal reforms. I understood it as rightly or wrong, but a strong, explosion of the concerns of the Jewish political left in Israel with a little bit lacing of the ideas of the ideological left. So when we see signs that says, because in Jewish law, Israel is a Jewish democratic society, see the word Jewish crossed out, people really hating the Bible, hating religion. If I'm now revealing our deeper level, we were very concerned by this, especially the hatred of the Orthodox. Orthodox were spit on. They were harassed. They were chased out of parks in Tel Aviv. So one thing that happened on I'm going to call this the extreme left, it became anti-religious, anti-Jewish. And it was very uncomfortable, meaning, when I walked to the local synagogue near our neighborhood, and I would walk with the kippah on, I saw that look of, oh, you're a religious Zionist? You're one of those ugly people? So there were many people that stopped wearing a kippah in public because it would actually incur wrath. Now, I'm talking about in Tel Aviv, not most other places. In fact, some of the rhetoric in Tel Aviv was, you religious people have all the rest of Israel. Tel Aviv is ours, and we are secular. And then I thought, well, there's hundreds of synagogues in Tel Aviv. There's a lot of people, they may not be Orthodox, but they love the tradition. So it became very uncomfortable and distressing that in the schools where the majority of the teachers were in this, what I'm going to call political left, ideological left, there was actually a movement to get Judaism out of the schools. I know it sounds impossible, but we saw it with our own eyes, and we heard people talking about it, especially on the Saturday night demonstrations. Now, not all people, some people, but enough that no one said, put that sign down. So I think I'm getting closer, and therefore I don't know what's going to happen as a consequence of this horrible, tragic war. But I think they realize the enemy the enemy's not making a distinction between a secular Jew and a religious Jew, and a Jew and a Tel Aviv Jew and a Jerusalem Jew. They want to murder everybody. So I think one thing that's going to come out of this, my prayer is, a result of this tragedy, is there's going to be a reestablished sense of Jewishness as a community of destiny. What is our destiny? Is our destiny to be murdered? Is our destiny to be victims of genocide and atrocities? Or is our destiny going to be to understand our Jewishness and understand it should be celebrated across a spectrum, but it should not include a hatred of Judaism, nor a hatred of religious Jews? I hope there's going to be a greater tolerance. Now, one thing I will share with you that Mirav and I noticed, if you look at any group of Israeli soldiers, you will see a large number of them wearing kippot, meaning they are identifiably religious Zionists. Many of those who rushed to the defense during the attack were religious Zionists. So if one were to say religious Zionists are bad for the country, right, they were among the frontline people on October 7 and 8. They're highly populous in the army, including leadership positions in special forces. So person by person, I have excellent relationships with the religious Zionists. Now we have a select crew of people. They've never said a harsh word about Reform Judaism. We have really good discussions. They understand where I come from. I can articulate myself. So our experience of religious Zionists, I'm going to dare to say, entirely positive. I will say, sadly, that my experience of the so-called Koach Kaplan, the secular protest movement, was almost uniformly unpleasurable. Okay? I don't want to really talk about it. I don't want to put anybody down, but I got to tell you, if you went off ideology in some parts of Tel Aviv, it didn't end well because people got so angry. Now, I would forgive them because I really understand historical forces and how they affect people and the complexity of Israel. But I believe person by person, it doesn't matter what you believe. You have an obligation to be ethical and not use Lashon Hara. So my question, as you all know, my question was constantly of anybody, I get it, but why use Lashon Hara? Why use vehement, vitriolic language that defames the character of other people? I mean, do you feel exempt from Lashon Hara? So I'm letting you in on some of the painful discussions Meirav and I had, and I think what we're talking about is a rehabilitation of teaching Judaism that it is uniformly respected and taught in ways that respect all the different points of view of Judaism, but the idea that Israel should become a democratic state where Yehudiyut or Yehudit is erased is, for me, untenable.